training. My name is Anna Greenberg. For those of you I haven't met, I'm the Oregon Coastal Organizer for Surfrider, and I have Bree as my co-host.
Hi all, I'm Bree Goodwin, the Oregon Field Manager for Surfrider Foundation.
Great. So we're going to launch into things, but I just want to do a couple quick housekeeping notes. We are recording this session so that we can put it up on our blog and people who aren't attending can see it. And we'll just ask that people keep their cameras on mute for now. And if you have questions, you can just write it in the chat and Bree and I will try and answer as we go. And so for the first at this point, about 50 minutes, we're going to be kind of giving you a lot of information about how city government works, how decisions are made, and how you can participate. And then at 6:30, we're going to have a panel of 4 city council members coming to join us so they can answer your questions and tell us about their story. So we got a good program ahead. So let's begin. So learning how local decisions are made and what you can do. And here's a reminder of our mission statement dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's ocean, waves, and beaches through our activist network. And also a reminder of our diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. We want to include all people in our activism and make sure that what we're fighting for also is accessible and helpful to all people. And of course, our land acknowledgement, as we're coming from different spots in this beautiful land, we should always take a moment to think about whose land this really is, the history, the present, the future of this land. Thank you for taking the time to read that and think about it. So we are here to talk about local government. I found a couple quotes about local government that I just wanted to share with everybody. This is from Valerie Jarrett, who was an important advisor in the Obama-Biden administration. And when I was in grad school here at U of O, there was one professor who was just always saying, everything starts at local government. That's where it's at. That's where you really have those personal connections and you have almost like a laboratory to do innovative policy that can be harder to get going at a higher state or federal level. So that is what we are focusing on today. I also have a quote from Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and yeah, this really kind of elucidates that how visible the decisions of the city are, right? We have citizens and decision makers right there living in the same place, and the results are very much on display. Whereas if you're living out in rural Oregon, things that are going on in Washington, D.C. might seem really, really distant. And we're going to be talking about the structure of local government, but we're also going to be talking about how us as everyday citizens can get involved with our civic engagement, which is really the power of the people. And that can be individual participation or group participation in issues of public concern. And it's really shifting the power dynamic from, you know, the people who are elected to these positions to everyday people like you and me who really care and work hard to get involved and actually start swaying the way that our cities are run. Some of you have come to our brown bag sessions that we've been doing on civic engagement. So we'll be brushing over some topics today, such as submitting and giving public testimony. And we'll send out a link at the end of this slideshow to all the blogs that sum up our brown bag sessions and where we take deeper dives into some of those civic engagement topics. And just always remember, if we each do a little, we all do a lot. So city governance, it's an institution that enables this community of citizens through our elected officials to maintain safety and a good quality of life. That's really what it comes down to. And it happens through developing policy, adopting and implementing, and planning and budgeting the finances. And the success is really dependent on the ability for the elected officials to stay in touch with the needs and desires of the public. So here in Oregon, we are a state that practices home rule. Not every state practices home rule. We actually have 4 different ways that cities can govern themselves, and they can choose. So the vast majority of cities in Oregon use this council manager form of government, especially cities that are over 5,000. And that's a system in which the council decides the policy for the city, and they also hire a chief executive officer to be responsible for the daily supervision of city affairs. So probably most of us live in areas that have that form of government. Some smaller Oregon cities also have a mayor council form in which the legislative and policymaking body is entirely a popularly elected council. And then there's also a couple outliers, like Portland is the only Oregon city with a commission form of government. And in that scenario, the elected commissioners function as the city council, but they also are administrators of the city's various departments. So it's a bit of a different role. And then there's also a strong mayor form of government, which I think I read that the only city that has that is actually Beaverton, which is right next to Portland. So you can have cities side by side operating differently. And here's some photos of some of our city governments at work. We have Portland in the upper left, Eugene going clockwise, Newport and Coos Bay, just to give you an idea of what happens in these city council, city hall meetings. And so the council members are elected, one for each ward, typically if it's a larger city that has several wards. And a ward is defined as an administrative division of the city that elects and is represented by a councilor. And so you can see a city like Astoria might only have 4 wards, whereas Eugene has, I believe, I won't count right now, but it has many wards. And you can look up, you can Google the ward map of your city and find out what those ward lines are. And so I just kind of am grabbing examples from different cities around the state. So here's the organizational flow chart from City of Eugene, where I happen to live. So this just gives you an idea of the format, right? So the residents of Eugene are actually at the top because technically they are the boss of the mayor and the city council. The mayor and the city council works for us. So that's why they're listed at the top of this organizational chart. And you can see out from there, they are helping supervise and work with the citizen advisory boards and commissions, which we'll go into a little bit more later. They're also working with their administrative staff, such as the city manager and assistant city manager. Then there's the court system, and you can see all these other departments that are in the city. And so this is Eugene, but this is pretty common for a city, having police department, public works, etc. And some of the basic city services that the city government is in charge of operating are public safety, which you can see, police and fire, utilities, land use, which is something not everyone thinks about a lot. It's not as visible, but it actually is a huge amount of power to make land use decisions, the planning, zoning, and code enforcement of an area. Transportation, so that's constructing, designing, maintaining streets, traffic safety, and sometimes public transit, depending on the place. There's also, of course, things like parks, libraries, recreation, legal ordinances that protect public health and safety. And then there's also programs that the city carries out, but they're directly related to federal and state mandates. So there's a state mandate, but the city is in charge of designing and implementing it for their own city. So what does the mayor do? Bree and I were talking about this, that we kind of, people kind of assume they know what a mayor does, but if you ask people, they might not always know all the details of what a mayor does. And the truth is that it varies from city to city. Each city has a charter that dictates the different roles and regulations for the city. But typically they serve as the public face of the community by representing the city at community events and government functions. They're also the spokesperson. They sit as sort of the presiding officer during meetings, and they help set the agenda for meetings. And they often are in charge of appointing individuals to committees and work groups, signing ordinances and resolutions. And most importantly, they serve as the chief facilitator between the city manager and city council. So we'll go into the city manager role a little bit more. City councils, which are those representatives from each of the wards, serve as the highest authority within city governments on deciding issues of public policy and public budget as well. In open public forums like city council meetings, they pass laws known as ordinances, adopt resolutions, and also conduct discussions and communications involving the governance of their communities. As a collective body, they're also responsible for the oversight of the administration. So not only coming up with the policy, but making sure that it's budgeted and implemented and the planning for that. So the roles of the mayor and the individual councilors vary considerably depending on the city size and form of government, but typically, the only city staff overseen by the council is the city's chief executive and potentially a handful of department heads.
All right. So city staff are obviously very important for keeping our cities running. They're usually implementing a lot of the decisions that the councilors are making. So they also are participating in the decision-making process in terms of providing their expertise on developing ordinances and resolutions, and just making sure that the city's functioning services are being delivered. And so again, under home rule, which I'll just mention, home rule, Dillon rule is the opposite of that I learned about just from working for Surfrider from our staff in states that are Dillon rule, where cities are not allowed to make their own laws. So you see that in Florida, I believe, where the cities can't make their own laws about certain things, which sounds very, very odd for us here in Oregon. But there is a little bit of interplay between state law and city ordinances, which we will get into a little more when we talk about a real world example and kind of walk through an ordinance being created. And then you saw in that diagram of the city of Eugene, there are lots of other committees, boards, and commissions that a city may have. Sometimes there's a lot of similarities in these committees and commissions, but they operate a little differently for each city. For example, since we're an environmental organization, the city of Florence has an environmental management advisory committee, and Lincoln City actually, right before the pandemic, they revived their environmental advisory committee. And the role of those advisory committees are to make recommendations to the council. So they really can kind of like deep dive into the issues that they're looking at, but they don't have decision-making power. But some commissions, like the Planning Commission, they actually have the power to approve or deny permits, but then those decisions can be appealed to the city council. And so it's these committees and commissions make it so that the city can really take an in-depth view of a lot of different issues, because the councilors have a lot on their plates. And so sometimes it's just better to have those advisory roles so that you have people kind of deep diving into the issues and providing input to the council and their decisions. So looking at council decisions, the council acts as central body and not necessarily as individuals. If you've been to a city council meeting, you've kind of seen this process for decision making. A councilor can make a motion, and then that motion has to receive a second from another city councilor before it moves into discussion and then ultimately a vote on that topic. So you can actually see, I've seen at city council meetings where a councilor makes a motion and there's no second because there isn't another city councilor that wants to move forward with that motion. And of course, there's a lot that can happen in there, like amending a motion and things like that. But in general, for something to move forward, you'll have a councilor make a motion, a second, discussion, and then a call for a vote. And the city code is what gets into, the city council rules get into the process that you follow for that for each individual city. So they're just, we'll keep putting that caveat in there that different cities might have different council rules. And so you might see the decision-making process be slightly different where you live than some of the places that we're using as examples. And the structure doesn't necessarily follow how we speak with our friends when we're debating something or deciding where to go out to dinner. It's more formal. And so that can be really challenging for newly elected officials, sometimes even for veteran elected officials, because especially when you're getting excited about a decision that's being made. I can speak personally, I'm on a city committee in Newport and am the chair. And so I had to learn this, and I always have to remind myself and the other committee members, like, okay, we have an open motion on the floor, so we have to discuss that particular topic to make sure that we're following the process. And so we'll hear from our counselors that it's seemingly the most difficult part of a counselor's job is to balance all of the diverse interests of their community members. And so, you know, there are communities that don't have wards, and so the counselors are kind of representing the entire community. But even when it is a ward, there's still a lot of diversity in there, and trying to make the best decision for the community can be extremely challenging. If you've ever listened to public comment on a decision being made, when there's not a lot of agreement, there's a lot of emotions running high and a lot of different values that are being presented by our communities. And you can't please everyone. So I know that our counselors have taken a lot of heat, especially over controversial decisions. So it's not an easy job, but we have some really amazing people on our councils throughout Oregon. So getting into sort of the types of decisions that councils are making. Generally, they're making legislative, executive, or the quasi-judicial decisions. So again, each council might operate a little differently. So I definitely recommend that, especially right now, because everything is virtual, I highly recommend tuning into your local city council meeting just to see how things work, to see maybe the rapport, the kind of relationship that your counselors have, and how they're communicating with each other, and what that sort of formal process is that they're going through for conversations. And then you could always, if you are someone who really, really wants to know the exact rules, you can find the council rules on your city's website. So legislative decisions are made by enacting ordinances, and ordinances ultimately become laws. They're enforceable. And to adopt an ordinance, there has to be a formal council decision that's at a public meeting, unless it's an emergency ordinance. And we'll get into a little later. Anna's going to cover public process, that will cover a little bit more about that. And then the council rules also address when and how and if there is public comment. And this quasi-judicial role is something I mentioned with the Planning Commission, is where we typically see it if someone is appealing a land use decision. Like it can be neighbors that are upset, it could be conservation organizations that think a development was approved in a geologically unstable area, for example. That's something that Surfrider does. Also, personnel decisions or contract decisions as well. And so, oops, I think I got these out of order. You might also see resolutions getting passed, and this is formally reflecting the opinion of the council. So for example, you might see cities that are passing a resolution in support of a bill at the state level. So it's just formally expressing the opinion of the council. And this is just a general sort of policy process. So identifying the problem or a need in the community. And this can be a counselor seeing an issue and raising it themselves. It can be a nonprofit, a private community member that is bringing an issue up to the council and saying, this is something that we need to deal with. And so sort of the thought process is thinking through, like, what are the goals with this problem, developing and analyzing different solutions and priorities. There's also a lot of research that you'll see, and this is a lot of where city staff come in, of researching how other cities have addressed the issue and how that's worked out for them, and sort of feedback and evaluation. And so city council meetings, again, there's pretty sort of typical agendas, and you'll see standing items that are on your city council agendas. There might be slightly different wording for different cities. This says weekly, but they're regularly scheduled meetings that the council holds. Some of them are weekly, sometimes it's every 2 weeks. And per public meeting laws, the agendas are published prior to the meetings, and you can usually see the entire packet. The entire packet has things like notes or research that's been done for each agenda item. So you'll see on the agenda if there are resolutions or ordinances, so any decision that's going to be made by the council will be called out. Communications, which is just what it sounds like. It might be a presentation from a school group or a presentation from the local waste hauler. Reports, which are typically from city staff. There's a consent agenda that's sort of a bunch of different decisions that they're just going to say yes or no to. And then if there are any proceedings, there can be executive sessions that are closed to the public if it's something that's somehow sensitive in nature, but that has to be printed on the agenda and noticed. So here's just a screenshot of a city council meeting. So you can see there's the call to order if there are any additions to the agenda. Interestingly, on this one, I don't see a standing public comment on this one. So I'll note that typically there's public comment that's on the agenda. And when it's listed on the agenda, that's for items that are not listed on the agenda. And so if there's a public hearing, then the public comment will happen that's specific to that topic will happen during the public hearing on the agenda.
Great. So that's quite a bit about how city government works. But then, of course, the next step is how do you get involved in your public participation? So by looking on your city website and looking at the agenda, you can see what agenda items are on there that you can provide testimony for. So you can search on your city's website and register in advance. Right now, it's mostly virtual, so it might be virtual testimony. Verbal testimony is typically preferable, but you can submit written testimony as well. Yeah, we had a really great brown bag session all on testimony, so we'll send around the link for that later. But you can also participate in the communications. So like Bree said, presentations on a topic of your choosing. Maybe it's something that the council hasn't been thinking about or doesn't know much about that you're an expert on or care a lot about. If you're not ready to actually start speaking or giving testimony, just watching the council meetings, whether in person or live stream, is a really great way to get to know what's going on in your community and get to know the people who are making these decisions. Our guest speaker at our public testimony session was talking about how giving that recommendation to get to know your counselors, start to see like, how are they voting? How do they communicate? Because then when you're ready to give testimony, if you're able to talk to them in a way where you're more familiar with them, they will most likely respond better. Okay, so there are a series of laws. Oh, well, here's an example of public testimony lasting nearly 3 hours on a debate over this shopping center development. And so here's land use planners, city planners giving this expert testimony. So just an example of that.
And I just wanted to jump in really quick, and another plug for watching a city council meeting now before it goes back to in person, which some councils are allowing in person. It can be very intimidating, especially your first time giving public comment. This is everyone sitting sort of on the same level, except for the audience, which is not typical at all. Typically, you have the counselors are sitting elevated up above where the audience is sitting and where you sit to give testimony. So it can feel a little weird in terms of power dynamics when it's your first time. And so I think the ability to participate virtually can really help. You're in the comfort of your own home. And you can get up to get a drink of water, because city council meetings can go really, really long sometimes. And then our speaker for public testimony for the brown bag session was saying that when she's at home, she'll have like a photo, I think it was of her grandmother that's kind of behind the screen, someone she loves and gives her power. So you can do those sort of things from the comfort of your home. And I think it's a really nice way to sort of break into giving verbal testimony and just being in a more comfortable situation.
And when you're giving testimony, you can think about what's going to be effective. You can give testimony as an individual, or you can band together with a group. I've seen groups before, all wearing the same color in solidarity to really make a statement. But a great point is to not be too repetitive with what you're saying, but try and build off of each other's testimony, even if it's all on the same topic. So there's a set of laws regarding public meetings that all public meetings and governing bodies meetings must be open to the public with certain exceptions. So, and that includes the Planning Commission, Budget Committee, Library Board, and I recommend trying to go to some of those meetings too. They're really interesting, and it might even inspire you to try and get on one of those committees or boards, because you can see that it's just everyday citizens who care about a topic, and there's really interesting discussions that happen. Unless there's an emergency, there must be reasonable notice of regular meetings, at least 24-hour notice for special meetings. Minutes are required to be taken, and there's public meetings law also prescribes handling of those minutes and public records, and how the government must respond to and handle requests for disclosure. So if you're sensing, I hope this doesn't happen, but if you're requesting meeting minutes or a meeting seems closed or something seems fishy, it's worth, if your gut is telling you that something seems off, it's worth looking into, because there are very strict laws surrounding this. And all final decisions must be held in a public meeting. So thinking, kind of expanding beyond the scope of what happens in that city council chamber, there's a lot of local cooperation that's happening, regardless of the form of government, whether it's any of the four that we discussed. Cities find their strength in this cooperative relationship with their citizens, with the city staff, with the private sector, and other government entities. So they're not working in a silo, right? It's very interdisciplinary. And cities tend to recognize the positive impact of working together, both regionally and on a statewide basis, to enhance community livability. And there's also some organizations in Oregon, like the League of Oregon Cities. That's a great resource that connects cities, and they also have great documents on that website. So we'll send out some of those resources later. So speaking of intergovernmental relations, city officials play this pivotal role in conversing with other cities, county governments, special districts, public schools, as well as regional, state, and federal governments. Understanding these relationships and their impacts gives the city government the ability to provide responsible, efficient, and effective governance and delivery of services, especially when staff and funding resources are limited, which they tend to almost always be limited. So exploring new and innovative ways of funding and providing public services is, of course, one of the challenging issues faced by elected officials. And just a reminder that even in light of home rule, local governments are still subject to statutory, constitutional, judicial, and charter limitations. So, they don't have total free reign of what they do in their city. Another thing to note about intergovernmental relations is that there's certain times where cities and counties and all these different levels of state government really band together. And we saw a lot of that this year with the response to forest fires and, of course, the response to the pandemic. So that is a time when they really need to be literate in how their different levels of government work, where they need to be familiar with each other's policies and the key players so that they can work together and respond quickly.
And on that note, also a common myth that we hear, sometimes even from city councilors themselves, is when we're doing our policy work, well, why don't we just ban the bag for the whole county? And if you pass an ordinance like that at the county level, it's only impacting the unincorporated areas of that county. It's not going to work for the incorporated cities. So for example, right now, Lane County is considering a polystyrene ban. And if that passes, it's not going to ban polystyrene in Springfield. So the city of Springfield would actually have to go through the process to develop an ordinance and ban polystyrene in their community, even if Lane County does that on their own. So just one of those common confusion points about city versus county jurisdiction. So we wanted to provide a real world example of how an idea became a law in Newport. And actually, Dia was one of the leads on this campaign. And if at any point you want to jump in, feel free to. Dia and Consuelo were the two leads on the Surfrider side. And there's a long history of considering a plastic bag ordinance in Newport, but I'm going to start with our recent effort that started back in January 2019. Really, the conversation started before. So doing research on ordinances and thinking about what a plastic bag ban would look like in the city of Newport, but really focusing in on the council process and then also the public participation process, so that you can see what it actually looked like. And so January 22nd, 2019 was the first city council meeting. Surfrider had prepared a letter asking the council to consider this issue. And so we were on the agenda as a communication item. That's me sitting on the right here. And I gave a presentation about the issue of plastic, single-use plastics, and what other cities and counties have been doing to regulate it. And then the woman on my left is Amy Thompson, and she works for Thompson Sanitary, which is the local waste hauler. And she talked to the council about the problem that plastic bags pose in the waste management system. And so these were just both informational presentations that we gave to the council. And so we also were working with some fifth graders at Sam Case Elementary in Newport. And as part of their curriculum, they had been researching plastics in the environment. And so we had a handful of fifth graders that gave testimony in support of City Council considering banning single-use plastic bags. And that's their teacher sitting next to them, and also highlighting, once we get back in person, different cities have different systems, but in Newport and a handful of other cities that I've seen, the actual microphone system to record all of the audio and to project the audio, you have to physically hold a button down for everyone to be able to hear you. And so Mrs. Schrader is holding the button for her fifth grade students. And I actually did it for Amy Thompson while she was speaking and controlling her slides. But that's like a common thing that people forget to do, especially if it's your first time giving testimony. It's like, forget about holding a button while you're talking. But the counselors are all very kind and will ask you to hold that button. And I am actually going to exit my screen share really quickly because I need to change a setting to make sure. Okay, I'm going to play you a clip of public testimony. Oh, okay, sorry, one moment. It's amazing that a year in,
if you're trying to play Anders's testimony, is that what you're trying to play? Uh-oh. Oh, she's having bad computer problems. 1 second. Oh, her computer just froze and she is texting me. Sorry, everybody. Such is the Zoom world. Just going to give it 1 more second to see if she can get it unfrozen. Okay, gonna find her video, this video. One moment.
Bali has made their island plastic-free, straw-free, and styrofoam-free. San Diego.
Okay, hopefully you all can hear this. I wasn't planning to share this video, so I had to queue it up. Can somebody, if you can hear it, will you just give me a thumbs up when I start it?
Bali has made their island plastic-free, straw-free, and styrofoam-free. San Diego is too. Do you care about the world? Well, I do. I think plastic bags should stop being used because plastic bags are not safe for animals, because they're making more plastic and it's going into nature, and because they start from nowhere and end up everywhere. One reason I think that is because plastic bags are not safe for animals. Turtles are in danger. For example, they can choke from plastic bags. Additionally, turtles think that plastic is jellyfish. Many different animals are dying. Do you want that to keep happening? Or do you want to make a difference? It matters because fish are dying from all the plastic that is getting into the ocean and in rivers. Plastic is getting into our water and salt. We need to help plastic bags get banned from many places. Fish, birds, and turtles are the animals who get the most plastic in their bodies. I think plastic bags should be banned because plastic bags are not safe for animals. They're making more plastic and it's going into nature, and it starts from nowhere and end up everywhere. Let's make a difference.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about the technical difficulty, and thank you for playing the video. All right, do you see the presentation again? Okay. Man, come on, Zoom. It's been a year. We should be able to figure this out. Anyway, having the fifth graders present, and maybe this is something our counselors can touch on in our next segment, which we'll be hearing from them and asking them questions. But what I noticed was that in the discussion of the ordinance, I heard several of the counselors quoting the fifth graders that were providing testimony. And one very valid point that these fifth graders were making, because long story short, there was some discussion about whether this topic should be put on the ballot to allow voters to decide, or if the council should make the decision. And these fifth graders were saying, if you put it on the ballot, we lose our voice because we're not old enough to vote. And so that was a really moving argument from the fifth graders, who I also want to note that this fifth grade class, they researched the issue of single-use plastic bags on their own, and not all of the students in the class agreed that an ordinance was the right thing to do, although the majority of them came to the decision that they supported an ordinance. And it was amazing that their parents took the time to come to the council meetings and bring their students there to participate, even though it was late. There were some late nights, but it was really exciting to see these students here. So getting back into our timeline of how this ordinance came to be at the February 4th council meeting. The city council voted to schedule a public hearing on the bag ordinance. And so on the agenda, that was under the city manager's report, which I'll note when you're looking at the attachments to the city council agendas, you should always check out the staff reports. It's usually from the city manager, but those are really helpful because it has a lot of background and research. And then it also has the recommendation and the recommended motion for the city council to take. So if you're following an issue, that's a really good clue as to which direction the council will go. The council doesn't have to use that motion, but it's usually a good indicator of what's going to happen with that item.
Bree, are you able to repeat that? Because it cut in a little bit. It cut out.
Yes.
I just missed it.
Yes. So the city manager's report, and again, there are different city structures, but if you look at the city staff report, that will be an attachment on the city council agenda. There's really great background information on the decision at hand. And at the bottom, you'll usually see a recommended motion for the council to make. And so that's a really good indicator to you what action the council is going to take. And so the caveat is, of course, the council can make whatever motion they want. They don't have to take the suggestion from city staff, but it's usually a good indicator of what's going to happen. So February 4th, the council decided to set the first public hearing on a bag ordinance for March 4th. And in terms of the public involvement, that's what we've been talking about. There was so much going on outside of the council meetings. There's individual outreach to businesses that Surfrider and the fifth graders were doing. There were letters to the editor in the paper. Dia wrote letters to the editor. There were other citizens that were writing letters to the editor for and against the ordinance. Oftentimes what we see is people don't know a decision is being made. So we tried to make sure people know that this was happening. And then the counselors also were talking to people, which was very clear. Counselor Boteo, who you can't see in this picture, she's cut off, but she told us during one of the meetings, I've been talking to the Latinx population in Newport, and a lot of them are supportive of banning plastic bags, but they don't even know that this is happening. So how are you going to reach them? And she really challenged us to make sure that we were reaching all parts of the community. And to be honest, the fifth graders are the ones that actually reached that part of our community at soccer games and at church. So that was really great. We also supported that by getting materials translated into Spanish as well. And so March 1st was our March 4th was a packed room at the city council meeting. There's a movable wall to expand the seating that they opened because we had so many people in the room and standing room only. A note about public testimony. Sometimes Anna said it's really important, not to repeat everything that's being said, especially when it's a controversial issue or there are a lot of people involved, because sometimes the council will opt to say, okay, we have too many people who are going to be here forever. So if you can just keep your comments to, I am for this decision or I am against this decision. And then if you have something to add that hasn't been said that you need to add, you can. And then oftentimes there will be an opportunity to kind of rebut, which one of our fifth graders did. Oliver here on the left was amazing. The students all had notes that they would read, and then Oliver off the cuff decided to go up and give public comment. And then we created the hashtag Oliver for president because he did such a wonderful job, which is really impressive for a 5th grader. Okay, so after that first public hearing, there was tons and tons of public comment rolling in. There were tons of letters to the editor, comments on Facebook, which are not officially testimony. So make sure that if you want to be on the record about something, you're following the procedures for submitting public comment. But the council really wanted to be thoughtful in this ordinance. And so they chose to use a work session to sort of think about all of the public comment that had been coming in and take another look at the original language in the ordinance. So at that work session, typically there's not public comment, there's not decisions that are being made, but it really gives the council a chance to like sit down together and really consider what their next move is or the language of an ordinance. And so at the April 1st council meeting, there was a review of the updated language in the ordinance, and April 15th was the second public hearing for that ordinance, and the council decided to pass the single-use plastic bag ban at that April 15th meeting. So the first time the council formally heard about this or sort of had our proposal for them to consider it was January 22nd, 2019, and the ordinance was passed April 15th, 2019. And then there were some other things that happened after that. April 17th-ish, some community members that were not happy about that ordinance started a petition. And so community members do actually have the power, if there are enough voters that feel the same as them, to force a decision to go onto the ballot. So there was an effort to get enough signatures. It's 10% of, at least in Lincoln County, I'm not sure if this is statewide, but they had to get 10% of the registered voters in Newport to sign a petition to force the bag ordinance to go onto the ballot. They did not get enough signatures, so the ordinance stayed in place. But we're talking about getting things passed. There is also power for community members to be able to overturn those council decisions. Surfrider and our volunteers supported implementation. And then we talked about, sometimes then state laws come along. And on June 20th, the governor signed House Bill 2509, which was a statewide bag ban. And that bill has language in it that says that a local ordinance governing single-use plastic bags has to be at least as strong as the statewide bill. So for some local ordinances, it required them to either be repealed to use the state's bill or to be updated to be at least as strict as the state's bill. So sometimes we see things where a state decision can supersede, but not all bills actually have that language. Some statewide bills allow local ordinances to stay in place. And so I think we have most of our city councilors are here. So next we're going to have an opportunity to meet some city councilors and ask them questions. But if you have any questions for Anna or me before we go into that, the councilors can probably better answer your questions. But we wanted to give an opportunity if you had any questions before we start talking to our city councilors.
Yeah, how about you put your questions in the chat and we can decide if we can figure out if it makes sense for the city councilors to answer or not, because I definitely want to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So you can write questions in the chat that are either about this story that Bree shared or also just about city council and city governance in general. But we have 3 and possibly 4 city councilors who are joining us for the next half an hour, which is really wonderful that they are taking time out of their very, very busy schedules to join us. So here we have Greg Evans is not on yet, but we have these other 3, and I will let them introduce themselves because you want to hear from them, not me. So I'm going to ask a few questions of each of you, and then we'll open up the question session to the rest of our participants. So my first question for each counselor is for you to just introduce yourself and say where you're from, how long you've been in office, and a fun fact about yourself, because city councilors are fun people too, and the public should be aware of that. So how about CM, could you kick us off?
Yep, I can. Hi, my name's CM Hall, and I am a Newport City Councilor. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs. And I volunteer that information because I hold 2 careers, one as a sign language interpreter and one as an LGBTQ educator. And I teach at Western Oregon University in that capacity. I don't, fun fact, I mean, I kind of feel like I just gave you fun facts, but I am gonna say that I just want my camera or my background on like kind of a muted background, but if you want to see the real background, then you get to see my my pandemic pup, and that's Callie, and she's been a delight in my life. So that's my fun fact, is that I became a parent of a kid in the pandemic. So there you go.
Great, thank you. And how about Carmen? Could you go next?
Sure could. Hello, my name is Carmen Matthews. I'm a city councilor for the city of Coos Bay. And I guess for a fun fact of mine, I'm a avid surfer. Don't get to do it as much with all the involvement I have in various activities nowadays, but that's the draw to Surfrider for me, as well as owning a brewery. So beer and surf, good things.
Great, thank you. And Claire, welcome. Thank you. You could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the invitation. So I've served on the Eugene City Council since 2012. So I just got elected to my 3rd term. And my day job is I'm the union rep for the nurses that work at Peace Health facilities in Oregon. And I know Heidi because she knows me from my day job, because she's a nurse out at in Florence, where we represent the nurses. So, and fun fact is before I moved into this role, I at one point was going to pursue a career in aviation. And so I have my commercial multi-engine instrument rated pilot's license.
Wow. That is definitely a fun fact. Super cool. Great. So my next question is, what motivated you to run for office? How did you find yourself in this role? And how about let's go in reverse order to answer?
Sure. Well, before I started my service on the, excuse me, on the city council, I was recruited basically to apply for and serve on the budget committee. So most cities in Oregon have formal budget committees. And so that is, in our case, 8 citizen members, and then the 8 city councilors comprise the budget committee. So I served on that body for 2.5 years. And that introduced me to other committees in the city, including our Human Services Commission, which allocates all of our social service, or the bulk of our social services funding, along with the county. And serving in that role and talking with people, I, was getting feedback that, hey, you really articulate things clearly. You help, clear up confusion. I like the positions you're taking on this. And I just reflected that I felt like I had something to offer, and that this venue might be a good place to offer it. And I got a lot of encouragement in that when I started I originally went to our mayor at the time, Kitty Piercy, you know, and said, hey, I'm thinking about training. So I went through she directed me to a program called Emerge, which is a training program for Democratic women who are thinking of running for office. So I got a lot of encouragement, and I went through that program and kind of set myself up to be ready when my city councilor at the time, eventually in 2012, decided she didn't want to do it anymore. And that opened up an opportunity for me to run for her seat.
Thank you.
All right, I guess it's my turn. For me, much like many of you, I'm engaged in a multitude of public interests and organizations. So I've gotten to know a lot of different people in different factions, and you know, starting to understand the workings of governmental decisions was seeing a future down the line where I would want to run for a public office. And part of the reason why I'm involved in volunteer organizations such as Surfrider is I just want to make a better place for my daughter and for the next generation. And I want to leave this place better than when I found it. My community has been a big part of making me who I am, and I just want to give back in any way that I can. And I feel like through public office, you have that ability. And I was lucky enough to where the city council at the time, they had 3 positions open, and many of the councilors asked if I would like to run. And I figured that was no better time. I wasn't planning on it at the moment, but I figure when you're being invited, that maybe is the time you should go ahead and jump on. And I'm so grateful that I did. It's given me a renewed confidence in government protocol and the government in general. We have a very well-functioning city council in Coos Bay. We work really well together. We don't always agree, but we always are respectful. And that is just a breath of fresh air, it seems like, in today's world. So, and I think that that's partly due to the fact that I was involved in so many different organizations in the, prior to my being elected. And people saw that I was able to work through issues that were contentious without getting hot-headed or out of line, and was able to keep a level head. And I think that's really important for any volunteer on any organization, is just to keep things professional and to see the other side as much as possible. So that's how I got in and why I got in.
Yeah. So I'm a lifelong Oregonian, and in the early 1990s, Oregon was working to defeat a couple of anti-LGBTQ ballot measures. And I came out right at that same time. And my identity was a political, hot potato, right? And that, and it was a partisan issue. Just being queer was partisan. And it still is, sadly. But for me, I came out and then was working to defeat anti-LGBT ballot measures, and then went to go work on campaigns on a national level and on a statewide level, and also just worked to raise money for political organizations. And then it was about I'd hoped I would get a chance to run. I felt like I had experience and voice to speak up for more marginalized identities. And I was living in Portland and went through, divorce. And I just thought I always wanted to live in Newport, but I thought I would have to marry for money or win the lottery. And neither of those things were going to happen. So I just thought my job was remote, so I could do that from here. And so I just made the bold move, and it was already going to be the place I wanted to live the rest of my life. So I felt really lucky to get to move here, when I did, as opposed to when I was in my 60s or 70s. And so it was very clear, I wanted to be able to contribute. And I also, like Claire, went through Emerge, but I had always been on the campaign training side of it. And so it was weird to go through it like as someone who's like now putting on the hat of being a candidate myself. And now I actually am the chair of Emerge Oregon, which works to get women elected. And prior to that, I was working to and have for a long time worked to get LGBTQ and allies elected to Oregon offices across the state. So it was really like a win but I just didn't think that Portland was the right place for me. I think there are a lot of other marginalized identities that need to be at the table in the room right now. And I felt like I could do more here and be living in my dream home. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for those answers. It is really so cool to hear your stories of how you've got to this place. It's inspiring. So I have one more question for you before I open it up to everybody, which is, what is the best way for community members to communicate with you? And it's kind of a two-part question. So kind of on a personal level, what is the best way for them to form a relationship with you? And then also when they're giving testimony, what about it makes it compelling to you? Would any brave soul like to go first?
I can try to answer that. So on the personal level, well, first of all, and I don't know, if my fellow counselors in other jurisdictions experience this, but we get a lot of email and requests, and there's a lot that comes into our inbox. And so because I work a full-time job, like I'm assuming my colleagues do too, I have to really figure out how to manage my time in the most effective way. So when I'm sorting through emails, I will, even if it's an email to the general counsel, if that person identifies themselves as a constituent living in my ward, then I will typically respond to them. Whereas obviously I can't respond to all the emails that we get that are directed to the full city council. So, and if a constituent, and if someone reaches out to me specifically, so one valuable way is to try to ask for a one-on-one meeting. And again, I'll prioritize folks who are in my ward for those. I don't get a lot from people who aren't in my ward, but if they are a significant business in town or some other, nonprofit organization or something like that, then I'll definitely try to make the time to meet with them. So that for me is and via email is the easiest way for me to communicate with folks. I try not to give out my personal cell phone number. I have to certain people, neighborhood leaders, and that kind of thing for our neighborhood associations. And then for public comment, so we just went through a change in our public forum. We have traditionally had a very open public forum. People could come, they'd only have 3 minutes to give testimony, but it could last, 2.5 hours if there were enough people. And we found that was very challenging in terms of managing our work time, because we sometimes have business after that. So we just, right before the pandemic, we changed it up. We limited the amount of time to 2.5, well, we just changed it to 2.5 minutes for public comment and 90 minutes total. And for me, it's, state your thesis, what it is you're here to speak about, provide 1 or 2 examples and maybe a solution if you've got one to offer, and then thank us for, listening to your input. So that, for me, that's the most effective type. We people can be angry, people can be upset, and I can accept that people are upset and not necessarily be turned off by that. But if they are insulting and demeaning and, assume that we're a bunch of idiots, which we've gotten a few emails about that with that tone recently, then it makes it harder to kind of get through that, to be like, okay, I can see the problem you're trying to share with me. So being respectful, even when you're angry, I think is very important.
I could jump on next. Although, Claire, I believe you just pretty much hit on everything I would have said. I echo the email trajectory for getting a hold of me. I think that is the best, way to formally make an ask, and then the personal meeting is really the most impactful. And I'm willing to meet with people in my community as much as needed, really. I do own a business, so I am busy as well, but I have a pretty flexible schedule that is complementary to my public office. So I have a lot of conversations just on the street while I'm at my pub. People will just hit me up here and there, and that works great if I have time. But emailing me and scheduling something is just absolutely wonderful, and I haven't turned any of those down to date. So that is great, and I don't see enough of it, actually. So I would I guess suggest that if you're shooting for it, it would be a breath of fresh air for somebody to sit down and hear some real world solutions and concerns about what is happening in your community. And then when it comes to the decorum of doing public comments during a council meeting, we still are at 3 minutes, although we do change it if it's a controversial issue and we have a ton of people on the list. We'll change it down to like 90 seconds, really, or an abbreviated 2 minutes or whatever it is, so we can allow as many people to comment as possible. And then when that comes through, I think it's really important to be organized as an organization when you're presenting information, so that you're not hitting the same topic over and over and over again. And I think for like the bag ban was a big one in our community. LNG, the LNG terminal was a huge issue, and the dredging and changing of our estuary was a big issue. All of these things were major, like heavy public input lifts. And so we heard a lot of the same argument, and that it's not as productive, unfortunately. And in that instance, some good emotional stories have a place, but for me personally, it's too much of that can be detrimental to the argument. I want to hear some emotion, but I also want to hear a lot of facts that I can use in my arguments against or for whatever it is you're trying to push. I need ammunition, basically, to stand on your ground on your behalf, and I can't do that on just emotion. I have to have solid facts. And so luckily we've been fortunate to hear a lot of testimony from organized groups like Surfrider that make it easy to do our job and to make decisions on the public sphere. And really, if you can give a city councilor X amount of bullet points to help them formulate their decision, or for them to help communicate a decision, it really, really is helpful. So if you're in the balance between two sides on an issue, if there's some really solid points, it can really change where you will swing based on the factual information that you hear. So that is another big thing. Also, like Claire mentioned, any kind of denigrating of counselors on either side of anything is just, it's not acceptable. So I hope that none of you would ever do that. I don't think you would, but being respectful to people who share your concerns, but who are also in opposition to your position, it's extremely important. And it's really the only way we get things done in city council in general. So I kind of hold everybody else up to that standard as well.
I think I'll just say that we haven't had, since I've served on the Newport City Council, we haven't had a ton of controversial issues. The two really have been the bag ban and short-term rentals and vacation dwellings and such. But what I'll say is I have a lot of empathy for people who are brave enough to come and testify, because I know public speaking is a fear for folks. So, you know, sometimes you're like, you've put so much, you know, heart and soul into your remarks. And then if it's so many people on one side or whatever, we say like, we want you to abbreviate your remarks. And I do feel for that. Like that is hard to do, because you're like, but I timed it out. You know, like I had a 3 minutes timed. And so maybe like having a 1 minute version and a 3 minute version, but also don't hesitate to come to public comment, because that when you're in the room, it makes a difference, I think, for the counselors to see the people who really prioritize that and put that in their schedule. We do get emails. I don't think we see the volume that other councils do, but really that public comment period is meaningful. And I do want to Carmen's point, the piece about Surfrider, like when we were going through the bag ban, Surfrider was able to kind of tally all of the public comment and look and weigh it. Essentially, like it was 75% in favor. Now the 25% were very impassioned, very like passionate about like they don't want a bag ban, and they were outnumbered 3-1, right? And so it was really compelling to have that statistical data to say like the time has come. And it wasn't just students, although that was so compelling because they aren't folks who can vote that referendum on that referendum, right? So it was really a moving room to be in and to kind of see where people's interests lied. But I liked the idea that we had the opportunity that people could give comment, and we really didn't have any structure around it. Although we were like, if your comment's already been said, you know, you don't have to say it. But at the same time, I thought we needed to have a better plan from the outset. Like, okay, if we are going to limit this, then let's say like others have said like 2 minutes or 90 seconds if it's so many. But I want to give credit to people who show up also, because that's not easy to brave that. Yeah.
Thank you. Those were really great answers and very useful to hear, because we can kind of surmise what works for you, but it's best to hear it from you. So we only have about 5 minutes left, but I'd love a chance for any of our participants to ask questions. Any questions out there? And also, if there's anything else you'd like to share that you think city councilors, if there's not questions from the audience, just things that you think these folks might find interesting or useful if they're trying to work on an issue and connect to their community.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit, if I could, to both what Carmen and CM had to say. I too, like Sam says, really appreciate people coming to offer public comment. I used to you know, be a community advocate before I became an elected official. So I've been in that spot too, and, you know, getting the shakes and thinking everyone can hear the tremble in your voice. And so I would say most city councils try to make people feel as welcome as possible, even though you're in this imposing, you know, podium situation. But we we're listening, we're paying attention, and trying to be appreciative of that situation. I also really appreciate what Carmen said about the lots and lots of repetition. And I'm not sure how you work that, because having organized efforts is super important. And those are the ways we get good policy in my mind. You know, I was part of helping pass the paid sick leave ordinance in Eugene that then helped get it passed at the state level. And that was a well-organized advocacy effort, and lots of people gave public comment, but the organizers helped people take chunks of it so that we were hearing different things about the issue from a lot of different people. So that may be one way to think about, if you have 25 people who want to give public comment, trying to work with them so that there's some differentiation in their individual comments. And then I just wanted to share that, you know, we've been meeting virtually, which is great that we can still do it, but is not as great as being in person. But we realized that it's opened up being able to give public comment to people who might not otherwise be able to do so. So people with small kids at home, people who, don't want to take public transit at night. So we really hope to be able to do a hybrid of our public forum when we get back to meeting in person, and have people there in person, and then also allow people to give virtual. And so I'm excited to see how that's going to work for us.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay. For all of you being here, it just honestly, it's very comforting and it's very reassuring. I'm somebody that avoided politics all of my life because it makes me extremely uncomfortable, and so I was disgusted and disgruntled by a lot of the stuff that I saw, and so my way of dealing with that is just don't deal with it at all. But when I moved to Newport and I got that letter from the waste hauling company saying that we could no longer recycle most of our plastics, that was a huge shock to me. I didn't realize that my plastic wasn't actually being recycled, most of it. And then at the same time, the climate, collapse is happening. And then we had, the opportunity I'm seeing all the microplastic on the beach. And so that was a big issue for me to actually see that. It was the first time I was actually exposed to just like seeing, all of that on a pristine looking beach. And so that's when I realized that, oops, let me turn this off. Jeez. Nobody ever calls me, but now it's ringing. That was the first time that I realized that, my complacency and my apathy, there was just no place for it anymore. And that, I had to, if I wanted to make a change in the world, like a real change, I had to get involved. And that getting involved at the local level was where to start, because that's where all the big changes at the top, they first started at a local level. So, Bree was incredible. She's just, I have to say to her, I'm so grateful to her, because I don't know anything I'm learning how our government works, and I'm learning, but I feel, I'll wrap it up in just a second. I guess what I want to say is that there's a lot of people like me who are afraid to talk to their council members and to come to these meetings because I don't know anything and I don't want to look stupid. And I'm feeling like what I have to say or what my issues aren't worthy because I don't really even understand how the government system works. So these brown bag sessions have been amazing, and just the fact that you're all here tonight, making yourselves accessible to us, and that you're real people, human beings, just like we are, living in the community that have the same.
And there's not a criteria for
Yeah.
what you should know. So I just want you to know that you do know your lived experience.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to bring in, right? Bring your
Right.
perspective.
That's what we're all looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all so much. It's just been a really informative session, and I've gotten a lot out of hearing what you all had to say. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. And I'm sure we could all ask you more questions and hear different stories of anecdotes. But we know that time is precious, so we don't want to keep you all. So I'll be sending a follow-up email with some resources, and I'm going to be recording this and posting it on our YouTube channel and making a blog. But I really appreciate so much all of you, the participants, Bree, of course, and our 3 city council members who joined us today. Thank you so much for taking the time and for caring about your communities.
And nice to meet other city councilors. Hello and goodbye. Farewell. Thanks all.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.